Hello, I'm Mark Dolan. Good to see you. Now, let me tell you why this petition for an emergency general election is so important. Obviously, it has no constitutional relevance. We've just had an election. But it's the timing of this and the scale of it which are so shocking for this new Prime Minister. Don't forget that they've been in office for 4 months. And I would suggest that they haven't even had 20 seconds of a honeymoon. I think that the moment this government was elected, there were no celebrations, a weary sense on the part of the British public that we were in for a long and hard 5 years. Did you know that Keir Starmer entered number 10 with negative poll ratings? And also, in terms of the popular vote, Labour achieved, I think it was 13 million votes in 2017 under the leadership of the execrable Jeremy Corbyn. Well, it was 9 and a bit million for Keir Starmer. So the bottom line is that the popular vote wasn't fantastic. He entered number 10 with negative poll ratings. It's just unheard of for a Prime Minister not to have at least a few days where they are flavour of the month and there's a bit of hope. In the end, we know what happened in July of this year. It was about getting the Tories out without anyone having really thought through what we were letting ourselves in for. It's a little bit like being in a bad relationship, only to dump your partner and get someone far worse, right? Some guy that he's got tattoos, he rides a motorbike and still lives with his mother. That is this Labour government. So it's an awful feeling. Everyone's got buyer's regret. And where do we go from here? Well, the left are doing what they always do, which is gaslighting everyone. So you've got people like John Sopel, who's the ultra-woke ex-BBC presenter, now doing the Newsagents, which is essentially a care home for ex-BBC lovies. And he's been on Twitter saying, there's a constitutional thing and it's not significant and who cares? And that's what they're all saying. And of course, he's right on a strictly, rules-based point. But this is authority. This is a mandate. The public don't like Keir Starmer. They never have done. It was about getting the Tories out. And now we've got a government that is facing a petition of over 2 million people seeking a general election. Now, you've got to take that figure with a pinch of salt because I understand that you can vote many times. Some people are accusing Russia of interfering with this, Russian bots. It doesn't matter. The fact that this petition was created in the first place and the fact that it's had plenty of support tells you everything you need to know about this new government. And why are they so unpopular? Well, I think it's because I think this Labour government is proof of what happens if you say literally anything to win power. Okay, it's a lovely thing, isn't it, to become Prime Minister? It's a lovely thing to get into government. But at what price? And the price is credibility. The price is the respect of the British people. So you've got Rachel Reeves before the election saying she doesn't anticipate raising taxes. And then you've got the biggest tax raid since the Second World War. It's wild. People feel lied to. Keir Starmer said he would look after the pensioners. He's taken the winter fuel payments off 10 million of them. The government have said, this new party of government, Labour, have said that this will be the government of economic growth. Well, the budget for growth saw the OBR reduce growth expectations. And when Keir Starmer took over, the British economy was number one in the G7 for economic growth, 0.5%. And they've taken it down to 0.1%. So it was a budget for growth and a government for growth that is destroying growth. Make it make sense. So the growth is a disaster. Then they said they wouldn't raise the taxes. Well, we've had this crazy attack on businesses with the national insurance contributions on the part of employers, which the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who are politically neutral, have said will inevitably be passed on to customers with higher prices. Welcome to inflation. It's back. And then the extra costs will be shouldered by the employees. Okay, so there will be less recruitment. Some people will be laid off. That's right. Companies are letting people go in order to make the bills add up. And the other thing that will happen is you'll have lower wages, less bonuses. It's a race to the bottom. In a word, it's socialism. And history ought to have told us that it doesn't work. Well, I think this will be the last socialist government ever, because they are going to tank the economy. They already are. In fact, I'll be honest, Liz Truss and her ill-fated mini budget is starting to look like a kind of truly majestic moment in British economic history. Liz Truss is looking like Milton Friedman compared to Rachel Reeves. Let's not get onto the fact that she claims to have been an economist and has proven to be an economist with the truth and not much else. Also, can we be done with this idea that she is Britain's first woman chancellor? Who cares? I was 1 when Margaret Thatcher became the leader of the Conservative Party, and I was 5 when she became Prime Minister. Okay, and I'm properly old. Since then, we've had a whole bunch of female prime ministers, thanks to the Conservatives, who ironically are the party of diversity, and nothing from Labour. So she's the first woman chancellor. Let me tell you, that is an embarrassment for women. I'm embarrassed for women. Margaret Thatcher, my political hero. So I'm all for women in power. Margaret Thatcher, the greatest transformative figure. I mean, what have you got for the 20th century? You've got Thatcher, you've got Churchill, and then, love him or hate him, I'm afraid he belongs on that list because he won 3 elections back to back and transformed the country in his own way. And that was Tony Blair. But anyhow, so look, first woman chancellor, do me a favour. Probably the last on the strength of this performance. Catastrophic. Can we have some brilliant women in politics like Margaret Thatcher, please? Because so far in the last few years, we've had Jacinda Ardern, who basically was a dictator in New Zealand and a terrible illiberal person who said that at one point during the pandemic, your only source of truth is the government. George Orwell spinning in his grave like the Large Hadron Collider. Then we had charming Nicola Sturgeon, who was quite happy to see male rapists accommodated in a women's prison. You couldn't make it up. And who wound up leaving the party because of that disastrous legislation that they were looking at, which was the self-ID bill, which backfired politically for her, plus question marks about the SNP and corruption. So, you know, and then there's Rachel Reeves, the worst chancellor ever. I mean, by a long chalk, the worst chancellor ever. So can we please have some brilliant people like Margaret Thatcher back in frontline politics? Well, we do. We've got Kemi Badenoch, haven't we? Anyway, Kemi Badenoch is for another day. Let's just sort this out. Let me give you, because you could argue this is all opinion. Let me give you some facts. Almost 2/3 of companies plan to hire fewer people as a result of the budget, as Rachel Reeves is accused of forcing employers into, and I quote, damage control mode. This is the budget for growth. Companies are now in damage control mode. The Confederation of British Industry's chief executive has warned today that tax rises like this must never again be done to business. This is the CBI, who are currently having their annual conference at which the Chancellor, Britain's first woman Chancellor, amazing, women, be embarrassed, is expected to attend. That's right. She's going to pitch up and she's going to be as popular as a fox in a chicken coop, isn't she? She's going to be as popular as Prince Andrew at a backstage meet and greet at a Taylor Swift concert. It's not going to be good. A poll by 266 business leaders by the CBI underlines the extent to which workers will be hit by employer tax rises, as I have said. Okay, it's terrible. Almost half said they will be forced to lay off staff, right? So that's people losing their job. They get fired maybe before Christmas. Welcome to hell. 46% are looking to delay pay rises for their workforce. And wait for it. Here's the kicker. There are now fears of a recession. Now, I love this country. I want it to prevail. But if Britain goes into recession off the back of Rachel Reeves's budget for growth, I will be laughing like a hyena. In fact, I'm willing to be poorer just for the sheer hubris of it. Anyway, absolute catastrophe. See, that's why this petition is so significant. Okay, it's the timing of it, 4 months into a new government that didn't have a honeymoon period. The number of signatories, over 2 million. Even if it was half that, right? If people have been voting twice, whatever, even if it was half of that, Sir Michael Caine, the greatest actor in the history of this country, has just retweeted and shared the petition. So if Michael Caine's not happy, then frankly, it's game over, isn't it? That is surely the tipping point for this wretched, terrible government. Let's have a look. Let me give you a bit of a quote from a business leader. All the talk about a growth strategy has dissipated as it's gradually sunk in that there is nothing much there. And that goes back to what I said earlier, right? This is a government or a party that was willing to say anything to win power, which is lovely. It's lovely to be prime minister and be in the chauffeur-driven car and all the rest of it. But it's not much good if once you win power, you realise there is no plan. And that is a quote from Rishi Sunak, who said that Labour didn't have a plan. And I'm afraid he was right. I love Rishi Sunak, and I think he's the best prime minister we've had in decades. And he was totally proved right. He was proved right when he warned about Liz Truss's mini budget. He said it'll spike interest rates, inflation, all the rest of it. The markets will crash. All of that happened. He's now correctly predicted what's going to happen with this Labour government. And if there was a way to bring him back, but obviously that's not going to happen, is it? I mean, I realise I'm in a very, very small minority of people that like Rishi Sunak, but I just think I put a poll out on X the other day and it got a colossal amount of engagement. And I asked people, would you bring back Rishi Sunak or would you stick with Keir Starmer? And I think it was 96% in favour of bringing Rishi Sunak back, which is damning for this new prime minister. After 14 years of Tory rule, I do a poll and that many people want to bring Rishi back. And they didn't even like Rishi, but they're done with the boyfriend in the leather jacket with the motorbike and the tattoos who still lives with his mother. Okay? It's not been good. And that's why the petition is so significant. And of course, you know, Labour posed as the party of business. Now they've shafted business. They posed as the party that would support pensioners. They've shafted pensioners. They were going to protect working people. Now, Keir Starmer, because he's so profoundly dishonest, wouldn't really be led on what a working person is, except it's someone that goes to work, apparently, that has a pulse. And but the working people were going to be looked after. Well, no, because working people work for a company, and those companies have been eviscerated in this national insurance tax raid. And that will hurt them because they work for the companies that are being damaged. So if you work for a company that's being damaged by the state, then you'll be damaged because you're part of that company. And that damage will look like, sorry, Steve, we're going to have to let you go. Sorry, Steve, the pay rise isn't going to happen. Sorry, Steve, no bonus this year. Sorry, Steve, we're going to cut your wages. Like it or lump it. So that is the thing. And by the way, the assault on business, you know, it is just a disaster. This is where the right are not good at communicating because they haven't explained the moral case for business. And the moral case for business is you've got two choices. You can either have the state employing people and paying their wages, or you can have private enterprise doing it. If the state does it, that means it's got to come out of taxes. So you and I got to pay for people to have a job. Now, a bit of that's fine, like doctors and nurses and police officers. But it makes sense for most people to get their money not from the taxpayer, because that's a limited, finite resource. Better to get it from businesses, like just lovely, rich companies that make money. Capitalism, you're welcome. An old-fashioned idea might catch on. So it's very, very important that, the right have failed to make this case, which is why we've now elected these terrible aspiration-hating socialists. And I don't use that term lightly. That's exactly what it is. If you attack businesses, that is impacting. Well, it's anti-capitalist, isn't it? If you tax companies so they've got to lay people off and not invest as much, that is against the principles of capitalism. And what is the opposite of capitalism? It is socialism, which has quite literally never worked. The failed idea that never dies. And it's because the right aren't good at selling capitalism, which, by the way, does need to be controlled in its own way, but not like this. So you've got the tax raid, and then you've got another kind of quadruple whammy. You've got the increase in the minimum wage, which I'm going to be controversial and say that in principle, I support it. It's a bit inflationary and we can't afford it and it's a burden on business. But I think that you could argue for the minimum wage going up. We could debate that. I'm 50-50. But what I'm against is this extraordinary change to workers' rights, giving people workers' rights from day one. So sick pay from day one. So literally, Sharon has just started and it's Monday. Tuesday afternoon, she's like, oh, I've got to go home. I've got a tummy bug. We don't see her for 3 months. Can you imagine if you're a small or medium-sized enterprise having to deal with those circumstances? Apparently full bereavement pay, God knows what else. After minutes of working for the company, your new employee has gone AWOL, and they've got a legal right to do that. Disaster. Plus the possibility that workers will have the right to claim an unfair dismissal after day one, right? That's being tabled and considered. Well, that's a nightmare for companies because they can't hire someone and then see if they're any good or not. And if they are total rubbish, then you can't do anything about it. It's catastrophic. And the issue is, and this is what you have with Labour, which is a lot of what they say they're going to do comes from a good place. So like workers' rights, who would argue with that? I believe in workers' rights and unions. But not if it destroys the business model of the company that people work for, because that's like a loss for everyone when it closes down or they have to sack people. But the other issue with it is that, you have, for example, let's have a look at 0 hours contracts, right? 0 hours contracts destroys freedom. Did you know that last year, over 1 million people enjoyed the freedom of 0 hours contracts? And the government are going to get rid of them. So it's saying to those 1 million people, well, I know you enjoyed, you wake up on a Tuesday and you just think, okay, I'm going to see if I can get a bit of work today. And you go and do a shift somewhere. The freedom enjoyed by students, by single parents, by older people. I've done 0 hours contracts. In fact, until I got my job at GBNews, I was self-employed. My whole life was one big fat 0 hours contract. It's the way it goes. It's the gig economy. It's not much fun when you don't know what's happening next week. But, if you don't like a 0 hours contract, you can get a job. Proof of that is that there are 1 million job vacancies in the country as we speak. So why not give people a choice? Well, because Labour and socialists are not about choice. It was Margaret Thatcher, our first woman prime minister, when I was 5, who believed in choice. So she let people living in their own council house to buy it so they can have a legacy. She created a business-friendly environment which produced a revolution of small to medium-sized businesses who are the lion's share of our economy. And she introduced school league tables so that you could actually see the performance of the schools around you that you were considering sending your kids to. Why? Because she believed in accountability and choice. And that is something that Labour don't like. They objected to the measures at the time, and you can see now Labour in government, they're scaling back on that with Ofsted, getting rid of the one-word Ofsted report. Well, outstanding, excellent, whatever those different words they have are for it. That empowers people, and Labour don't like that, and neither do the unions, who also want to get rid of exams. We'll do an education special soon. But anyway, the whole thing's a disaster. The pensioners, don't even get me started on the farmers. The cruelty and arrogance and lack of empathy on the part of a few woke commentators on TV, on radio and online, dismissing the farmers as somehow a bunch of rich landowners in 300 quid barber jackets on sprawling country estates in a 80 grand Range Rover. That is not farmers, okay? Not all farmers are Jeremy Clarkson. It's not all hedge funds. Proof of that, right? If it was just a tiny number of people affected, why are all farmers furious? And why did 14,000 farmers, which is probably all of Britain's farmers, descend in central London on Tuesday? So anyway, it's been a disaster. This will be the most hated government in history. It's certainly the most hated new government ever. And I don't see them turning it around, because I think that Keir Starmer, and I don't want this to seem like a personal attack, but in my view, he is just what is the word? He is a pathologically dishonest man. Okay. Every cell in his body is dishonest. Now, I think it might be because he's a lawyer, and lawyers are good at jumping on arguments, but the guy doesn't stand for anything. He supported Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister, which would have been a national security, economic and sort of international disaster, because this guy wanted basically, he wouldn't commit to pressing the nuclear button if we were attacked by Russia. And he wanted to disarm, and he would have destroyed the economy and all the rest of it. We know that. Well, Starmer was his biggest cheerleader. Starmer wanted to reverse Brexit. This guy picks the wrong side of every argument. He was pro-lockdown, which not too many people are willing to defend these days. But I think the only reason, but I think the guy is just pathologically dishonest. I think all he does is posture and says things out loud that he thinks will get him elected, or now in this case, keep him in power. And, the guy is it's just not what you see is what you get. The guy does not have that substance. And it's worrying because he's in charge. So as long as he's prime minister, then this government will not prevail. It won't succeed. Okay. The only chance Labour have got is to get rid of him and put someone dynamic in, like Wes Streeting. But the guy is ambitious and he's ruthless, and he will cling on to power, which is great news, because the Tories and Reform need Keir Starmer to stay so that he can be Britain's worst prime minister ever. And then Labour will be out. So there you go. Think of this petition as a kind of little bellwether moment about what's coming for this government, okay? The first 100 days were terrible. Do you remember Freebiegate? Oh my God. Well, it's gonna get worse. And all we got to do is try and survive. Let's see how much of the country is left by the time of the next election. But mark my words, this hated government will not prevail, and Labour will not win the next election. I'm Mark Dolan. Thank you for watching. Catch up soon.